Title: The Silent Oath. The village of Black Hollow had always been a place of whispers. It lay at the foot of the Thornewood, a dense, gnarled forest that the villagers never dared to enter. They told stories of the Shadow Huntsman, a being who roamed the woods, ensuring that those who broke the silent oath paid a terrible price. No one knew where the legend began, but everyone feared the name. Elric, a young blacksmith's apprentice, never put much stock in the stories. He had seen the woods every day, their darkness stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. But to him, it was just a place like any other. That was until the night his father disappeared. Joran, the village blacksmith, was a man of few words, respected and feared for his skill in the forge. One evening, he left the shop, saying he had business to attend to. He never returned. The next morning, the only sign of him was a bloodied piece of his tunic, found at the forest's edge. Elric was not one to sit idle. He armed himself with a hunting knife, packed a lantern, and stepped into the Thornewood before anyone could stop him. The air inside was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't, and the deeper he went, the heavier the silence became. It pressed against him like an unseen force. He found the first sign of trouble near a hollowed-out tree. A crude symbol had been carved into the bark, a jagged eye. He had seen the mark before, on old scrolls buried beneath the church archives. It was the sigil of the Silent Oath, a forgotten order that had once protected the village. But they had been wiped out centuries ago, hadn't they? A snapping twig made Elric whirl around, his knife raised. A figure stepped from the shadows, cloaked in darkness. "You shouldn't have come," the stranger said. Their voice was hoarse, ancient, yet oddly familiar. Elric's grip tightened. "My father, where is he?" The figure stepped closer, allowing the dim lantern light to reveal a weathered face. It was Joran. But his eyes, they were not his father's anymore. They burned with an unnatural glow. "The oath was broken," Joran whispered. "And now so am I." Before Elric could react, the woods erupted with movement. Dozens of figures, clad in rags and shadows, emerged from the trees. Their eyes glowed the same as Joran's. They had all once been men, but now they were something else. "Elric, run," his father cried, his voice briefly breaking through whatever force controlled him. But it was too late. The shadows took him. Elric struggled against the hands that grasped him, cold and firm like the roots of the Thornewood itself. The figures did not speak. Their breath was heavy with the scent of damp earth and something ancient. He kicked and thrashed, but the shadows carried him deeper into the woods, where the lantern's glow barely reached. After what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a clearing. In its center stood a massive stone monolith, covered in the same jagged eye sigil he had seen before. The air here was heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Elric was thrown to the ground, the figures surrounding him like silent sentinels. Joran stepped forward. His face, though familiar, looked wrong, stretched, as if something inside him was trying to break free. "Listen to me, boy," he said, his voice more his own now. "You must leave. Now." Elric's mind raced. "Not without you." Joran clenched his jaw. "It's too late for me. Too late for all of them." He gestured to the others, who stood unmoving. "The huntsman marked us. We broke the oath. The silent oath. The stories were true." Elric shuddered as realization dawned. The oath was not just a tale. It was a binding, a pact forged long ago to protect Black Hollow. Those who broke it did not simply vanish, they became something else. A low growl echoed from the trees beyond the monolith. The air grew colder. The figures around Elric flinched, their glowing eyes flickering. "The huntsman comes," Joran whispered. Elric turned toward the sound. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, cloaked in tattered shadows, its face hidden beneath a hood of blackened bark. In one hand, it held a blade, not of steel, but of something darker, shifting, pulsing like a living thing. "Elric, run," Joran pleaded again, his voice breaking. But Elric didn't move. His father was still in there, buried beneath whatever magic held him captive. He had come too far to abandon him now. The huntsman raised its blade. The figures around Elric stepped back, their glowing eyes dimming. The air felt thick, like the moment before a storm. Then Joran moved. In an instant, he grabbed Elric and shoved him aside. The huntsman's blade slashed through the space where he had stood. The silent figures gasped, as if feeling the pain through some unseen bond. "No!" Elric scrambled up. Joran had fallen to his knees, clutching his chest where dark veins spread like ink through his skin. "Elric." His father's voice was barely above a whisper now. "Break the oath." Elric froze. "What?" Joran's eyes met his. "Break it. Set us free." The huntsman loomed closer, its blade raised again. Elric's mind raced. The oath was binding them, but how could he break something he barely understood? His eyes flicked to the monolith. The sigil. The symbol that bound them. He had no time to think, no time to second-guess. He rushed forward, knife in hand, and drove the blade into the heart of the sigil. The stone shuddered. A terrible sound, like the wailing of 100 lost souls, split the air. The ground trembled beneath him. The glowing eyes of the figures flared bright before vanishing into darkness. One by one, they collapsed, their bodies turning to dust. Joran smiled, just once before he too faded. The huntsman let out a terrible shriek. Its cloak of shadows unraveled, revealing nothing beneath. Then, like the others, it was gone. Silence returned to the forest. Elric fell to his knees, chest heaving. His father was gone. But so was the curse. Black Hollow would never know what had happened that night. The villagers would never hear of the silent oath or the huntsman again. But as Elric left the forest, his father's voice lingered in his mind. Sometimes, breaking an oath is the only way to keep a promise.